Entering the shrieking silence, you believed that awakening would be the end of the quest, that by understanding the universal laws, by sensing the energetic field, by accessing the profound silence of the being, everything would finally make sense. And for a time it did. You felt the expansion, the peace, the clarity of being connected to something greater. Consciousness became your new home, and for a few seasons, that sufficed. But then, something strange began to happen. A subtle void settled in, not a desperate void like that of unconscious pain, but a silent, disquieting space, a kind of echo that seemed to come from within, as if something in you knew there was still more beyond the light, beyond alignment, beyond positive vibration, something that the language of awakening could no longer reach, something that the spiritual vocabulary, however beautiful, could no longer sustain. The masters spoke of light, of love, of unity. They said everything is within you, that everything is consciousness, and for a time you believed, you repeated, you lived, and in a way you experienced. But now, this same language seems hollow. The phrases that once captivated you now sound like noise. What was once revelation now seems like programming. You begin to realize that even spirituality can be a comfort zone, that even awakening can become a closed system, full of new rules, new dogmas, new invisible prisons. It is at this point that you cease to feel elevated and begin to feel alone. But it is not loneliness, it is absence, an absence of all that you once called truth, a space in which nothing holds, no technique, no mantra, no teaching, just you, facing that which cannot be named. This is the point few reach. The majority stops at the first liberation. They create a new altar, with new language, new vocabulary, and new certainties, but not you. You realize there is a deeper cycle that needs to be broken. And it is precisely this cycle that begins when you enter what we might call the second level. Here, there are no more maps, there are no techniques, there are no securities. Here, the truths that awakened you must be abandoned, not because they were wrong, but because they were temporary, because they were steps, not the destination. You begin to understand that everything that can be named is limiting, that even the idea of consciousness needs to be traversed, that perhaps in the end there is no center, and that true freedom lies not in discovering who you are, but in accepting that you are nothing fixed, stable, or definitive, and that paradoxically this is the most sacred thing. You begin to realize that there is something that precedes even perception, something that cannot be observed, something that cannot be named, interpreted, defined. And this is where the mind collapses. Because it cannot operate without reference. All it wants is to understand. All it knows how to do is organize. But this is the space where nothing organizes itself, where duality ceases to be a problem and becomes the natural language of mystery, where yes and no coexist, where self and non-self intermingle, where knowing and not knowing dissolve into each other, and you realize that the abyss is not a place of falling, but of suspension, of no longer needing to fall or rise, of merely remaining, feeling, and being at peace with the discomfort of no longer having ground beneath you, nor sky, nor meaning. And now, perhaps for the first time, you stand before the real, not the real of matter, not the real of energy, but the real that cannot be represented, that which is before sound, before consciousness, before time. And it is here that everything can, in fact, begin, because when nothing more can be said, everything can be lived. When certainties end, surrender becomes possible. When there is no longer ground, there is flight. This is the true abyss, not the one that frightens, but the one that liberates, not the one that destroys, but the one that reveals. And if you are here, it is because your consciousness asked for it, because you have seen enough to know that the new is not born from repetition, it is born from the silence between concepts, and that silence is now looking back at you. When even the light falls silent, the instant certitudes dissolve, something rare begins to occur. A new perception starts to insinuate itself, not as an idea, but as a presence. You don't know precisely what you are feeling, yet you know it is true. A kind of silence that is not emptiness, but density. A field that observes you as you observe it. An intelligence that does not speak, but communicates. And then you comprehend, the mystery cannot be possessed, only lived. The second level is not a new set of answers, but a new mode of listening. A listening without expectation, without conclusion, without haste. A kind of reverence for that which cannot be contained in words, which serves no system, which cannot be taught, only embodied. At this juncture, everything begins to become simpler and simultaneously more profound. existence ceases to be a question to be resolved and becomes a phenomenon to be inhabited. It is at this point that what was previously termed ego now reveals itself as an innocent construct, no longer an adversary to be vanquished, but a character to be understood. The ego is not an obstacle. It is the map of what has been, a construction that served to protect you as you traversed the unknown. But now, at this juncture, it begins to unravel, and with it, spiritual masks also crumble. Those that endeavored to appear as light, but were merely a new guise for control. Here, even the desire to evolve dissolves, for you understand that there is nowhere to go. That evolution is not a linear progression towards some form of perfection, but rather the constant blossoming of that which has always been present, yet concealed behind layers of exertion. All that was burdensome begins to fall away, not because you fought for it, but because it simply ceased to hold meaning. This place is not comfortable. It is not popular. Few arrive here because few are willing to lose everything. But those who remain, albeit trembling, discover something that could never have been accessed through techniques or knowledge. They discover the lightness of not knowing, the beauty of being transient, communion with that which needs no name. And at this point, something begins to reorganize internally, not because you attempted it, but because you allowed it. Surrender becomes real, not as an act of faith, but as a natural response to the collapse of all pretensions. You cease searching to be someone and begin to breathe what is, moment by moment. And thus, paradoxically, you begin to exude a presence more authentic, more potent, more transformative than any previous iteration of yourself. A presence that seeks not to persuade, nor to impress, but simply is. And by virtue of its being, it transforms. It is then, for the first time, that you perceive the other not as a mere reflection of your own sphere, nor as a manifestation of your unconscious, but as an autonomous, unfathomable, living entity. The other ceases to be a projection and becomes a portal. Alterity transforms into a mirror of mystery, and there, in the convergence of two voids, arises what we term genuine relationship. There is no longer any attempt to alter, instruct, or heal the other. There is simply space. Space for the other to be precisely as they are, within the silence of their own abyss. This is true love, not the conditional, romanticized love that requires another to feel whole, but the love that springs from the recognition of another's inherent freedom, the love that embraces the mystery of the other, just as it has embraced its own. At this juncture, bonds become vibrant. There is no longer dependence, but synergy. There is no longer fear of loss, for all is presence. Shared presence, not possession. This form of connection is unbreakable. It merely transmutes its shape when necessary, for it was never a confinement, but always a passage. If you have reached this point, you are not alone. It may well appear so. It may seem that no one else comprehends this wordless realm, this interstitial space between worlds. Yet there are others, scattered, silent, attentive. And when these consciousnesses recognize one another, an illumination occurs. A network forms. Not of followers, but of sentinels of the unseen. If you feel you belong to this, if something within you resonates upon hearing these words, then subscribe to this channel. It is not merely significant for us, it is significant for you. For this is how we sustain this space. This is how this silent network is fortified. Every subscription, every presence, every comment is a beacon confirming that the abyss is not isolation, but communion. The journey was never solitary. It merely demanded silence prior to reunion. The body, the everyday, and the invisible return. There comes a point when the abyss ceases to be a rupture and reveals itself as a womb. What seemed to be the end of all certainties begins to show its true nature. A fertile space antecedent to any form, where everything can be born anew, but authentically. You are no longer attempting to reconstruct what has been lost, nor are you trying to revert to a state of idealized enlightenment. Now all that matters is listening, a listening so profound that it becomes indistinguishable from existence itself. You stop asking yourself what your purpose is, because there is no longer any separation between being and fulfilling. Life ceases to be a problem to be solved and becomes a field of presence. You inhabit it, and that is enough. And most surprisingly, in this state, answers begin to emerge. Not as ideas, but as silent guidelines that spring from stillness itself. Life begins to speak, and you, for the first time, hear. In this new terrain, there is no longer any separation between the spiritual and the mundane. Sacredness is no longer found in rituals, crystals, techniques, or masters. It is in the way you brush your teeth, in the way you breathe, in the way you observe the silence between one word and another. It is in the way you exist without needing to prove anything to anyone. For the first time, spirituality and life become one, and this does not isolate you. On the contrary, it connects you. You no longer need to withdraw to find God, because God reveals himself in the texture of the dishes being washed, in the light streaming through a window, in the sound of leaves in the wind. Presence becomes complete, not because it is laden with meaning, but because it is free from the obligation to signify. And then you realize that nothing needs to be different. Everything is exactly as it should be, because there is no longer a should be, there is only what is, and that is sufficient. And then something even more profound begins to emerge. The body, which, for so long, was seen as an obstacle, a prison, now reveals itself as a sacred instrument. Not as a temple in the symbolic sense, but as living technology. The body ceases to be merely a vehicle for consciousness and becomes its extension. Every cell vibrates with intelligence. Every movement becomes ritual. You begin to feel that the body knows things the mind will never know. It carries memories that were not lived by you, but by many before you. Memories that are now released, not through effort, but through presence. You feel when something loosens, when a tension dissolves, when an old emotion is touched for the first time with genuine welcome. And this welcome does not stem from the intellect, but from the body, from gesture, from touch, from breathing together with what was once resistance. The body becomes a bridge between the visible and the invisible. And in this process, you reconcile yourself with your own embodied existence. This new state is not static. It pulses. It's as if you begin to operate from multiple layers simultaneously. You feel the world's pain but do not identify with it. You feel the beauty of simple things but do not cling to them. You know that all is impermanent, and yet you engage with life intensely. The paradox ceases to be a problem and becomes the language of your experience. You can laugh and cry at the same time. You can love and let go at the same time. You can know and not know at the same time. And none of this causes anguish. On the contrary, it brings a kind of peace that excludes nothing, a peace large enough to embrace even chaos. And in this embracing, something very rare occurs. You begin to move through the world with lightness, a lightness that is not the absence of pain, but the absence of resistance. You are no longer fighting against life. You are dancing with it. You have not become special, nor enlightened, nor a master of anything. Merely human, profoundly human, but with roots in the invisible. And it is this real humanity, devoid of idealization, that begins to touch others, not with pretty words, but with presence. A presence that does not seek to convince, but that welcomes, that does not impose, but listens, that needs no stage, but sustains silence. This is the genesis of a new way of existing, a way that cannot be taught, only witnessed. And if you feel this vibrating in your field now, then you are already living what many are still searching for. No longer as a quest, but as rest. No longer as escape, but as acceptance. No longer as achievement, but as return. A return without a starting point, a return to what always was, to what was never separate, to what was merely waiting to be recognized from within. Silent action, embodied vibration. The return to silence is not an escape, it is an invisible revolution, a transformation so profound that it can no longer be perceived from without, but only felt by those who live it. You no longer need to announce your awakening, nor require others to acknowledge your metamorphosis. You are beyond the need to prove anything, even to yourself. The great pivot of this second stage is this: a consciousness that does not boast but radiates, a truth that is not shouted but which alters the surrounding atmosphere. Here, words are few, but the effect is tangible. The impact stems not from force, but from coherence. And this is why, for those who reach this point, life begins to respond differently, not because it has become easier, but because it is finally in resonance. What was once resistance becomes flow. What was effort becomes dance. What was planning becomes spontaneous gesture. In this state, doing is born from being. Actions no longer arise from a need for affirmation, but from the inevitability of expression. You act because you overflow, because there is no longer any way to contain it. Creation ceases to be a desire and becomes a consequence. Your art, your speech, your way of touching the world become an extension of your internal coherence. You begin to perceive that it is no longer you who lives, but something deeper living through you, something nameless, formless, yet absolutely conscious. Your will aligns with what is, and in this convergence, all is transformed. You are no longer seeking results, because the very act of existing in full presence is sufficient. And for this reason, the fruits emerge. Not because they were forced, but because you have become fertile soil. Life no longer needs to be manipulated. It simply blossoms. At this juncture, even the concept of mission dissolves, for you no longer require a purpose to act. The action itself is the purpose. The present moment becomes so vast, so complete, that it encompasses everything. Silence and movement, contemplation and action. You no longer need to be inspired to be authentic, nor do you need to await perfect clarity to begin, for clarity now arrives en route. Inspiration emerges in the doing. Certainty is born from surrender. This is the moment where life reveals itself as the master. Each instant is a living lesson, not as something to be learned, but as something to be inhabited. Time ceases to be linear. Experiences cease to be stepping stones. All becomes spiral. You realize there is nowhere to arrive because everything is already here, in layers that unfold as you allow yourself to be entirely present. It is here you comprehend you are participating in something vaster, not as a cog in a cosmic puzzle, but as a living emanation of the field's own intelligence. You were not placed here to learn, to prove, or to evolve. You are here to express, to be a conduit, to make the unseen visible, not with words, but with embodied vibration. This is true conscious manifestation, not that which attempts to control events, but that which aligns so profoundly with what is, that everything around it has no choice but to rearrange itself. You do not force reality, you allow it. You move through it. You transform it, not by wanting to, but by being. True change happens when you cease trying to change it, when you become space where the new can be born unhindered. You walk through the world like one who carries a silent fire, a kind of lucidity that does not weigh you down, a maturity that does not harden you. You know what you are, and because of that, you no longer need certainty. You no longer need control. You no longer need explanations. What you are living now is trust. Not the blind trust of one who hopes for the best, but the quiet trust of one who has touched the ineffable and no longer needs to understand. It is from here that true responsibility is born, that of sustaining your vibration with honesty, that of not abandoning yourself, that of remaining true to that which has been recognized, even when the world outside tries to pull you back into old narratives. You no longer rebel, but neither do you yield. You simply sustain. You sustain presence. You sustain space. You sustain the living remembrance that something greater is already at work, and that your role now is to not interfere. The invisible beginning of presence. Everything you have experienced thus far has been preparation. Every quest, every disillusionment, every rupture that seemed to be an end and later revealed itself as a new beginning, every fragment lost so that something greater could be born. None of these moments were in vain. All of them have led you step by step to this point, a point that is neither geographical nor mental nor spiritual, but a vibrational point, a state where questions cease, not because they have been answered, but because they no longer demand an answer, where silence ceases to be absence and reveals itself as full presence, where urgency dissolves, where the self stabilizes within itself. It is here that what few experience begins, post-awakening spirituality, a space without rituals, without goals, without promises, a space that needs no name because you recognize it by feeling. You finally understand that spirituality is not a collection of practices or accumulated knowledge. It is not an aesthetic, nor a discourse. It is a way of relating to everything, to time, to the body, to the other, to the invisible. You begin to perceive that the most significant experiences were not those that gave you extraordinary sensations, but those that brought you back to the essential, those that taught you in body and soul not to resist, those that showed you through pain or beauty that the sacred is wherever you are whole, not in sacred places, but in the wholeness with which you occupy any place. True consciousness does not distance you from matter, it makes you honor it, and the heaven you sought in altered states of perception now begins to reveal itself in the way you hold a cup, in how you breathe in the presence of another, in how you look at the world without wishing to control it. Now something more mature begins to manifest, not as a revelation, but as a return. You begin to return, but not to the point of origin. You return to life with a new vibration. The same street, the same routine, the same encounters, everything reveals itself in a new light, because the one who looks now is not the same one who departed. It is a version of you that no longer expects perfection, but truth, that no longer seeks salvation but presence, that no longer needs to understand but can feel, and feeling is enough. Spirituality ceases to be a path and becomes a dwelling. You inhabit this invisible place within yourself with such completeness that the external world begins to reorganize itself naturally around you, not as magic, but as a response, as a mirror, as a coherence between vibration and matter. You realize that what you were seeking was always here, but it could only be recognized when the layers of urgency and illusion dissolve. And it is here, in this field of radical simplicity, that something precious occurs. You begin to recognize others like you, who have also quietened, who have also stopped shouting, who have also stopped running, and in this recognition, a new form of bond is born, a connection without words, without expectation, without need, a silent communion, a living network, not of bright lights but of serene flames, souls that do not need to show off to exist, that do not need to be right to sustain presence. They are few, but they are here. And when two such beings meet, even without uttering a word, something ignites in the invisible, something that modifies the field, something that changes everything without making a fuss. Perhaps now you understand that true awakening doesn't bring only light, but also reveals the shadows that have always surrounded you, silent, patient, waiting for the right moment to show themselves. You've already crossed the portal, and there is no turning back. But don't be afraid. You're not alone on this journey. Here on this channel, we are travelers of the same invisible road, searching for answers no one dares to ask. And the next video might just be the step you need to take. Click to watch, because sometimes what you're looking for is exactly where no one dares to look. Thank you for watching this video. Please subscribe to our channel and give this video a like. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you'll be alerted about our new uploads. See you in the next video.